Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here in Washington, D.C. on this 50th anniversary commemorative year of the Apollo 11, the first manned moon landing. But there were many missions that made Apollo 11 possible, and one of them was Apollo 10. And it's our absolute honor to be talking once again to retired United States Air Force Lieutenant General Tom Stafford, the commander of Apollo 10, on exactly, sir, 50 years ago. Right now, you were coming back from the moon.
50 years ago today, we left the moon.
I think that's positively extraordinary. And for those of us who are fans of the moon program, obviously everything is centering around Apollo 11. But some of us are a little disappointed that there wasn't actually even more coverage, because we had Apollo 7 that passed without much recognition. There was some recognition given to the Apollo 8, but then Apollo 9 had happened, and now 10 is happening. Do you think that enough recognition is being given to the Apollo program at this point, given its importance to human history, but also America's technological and the nation's history?
Well, no, I don't. I think, it was a late famous author, Arthur C. Clarke, said that 1,000 years from now, when historians look back on the 20th century, that they will note that, yes, there were two major world wars involving developed countries in the northern hemisphere. But the one thing that will stand out forever, probably more than anything, will be the Apollo program and the landings on the moon.
Why do you think it's so, aside from the fact that you played such a critical role in it, why do you think it's so important to remember the Apollo program?
Well, it shows what this country can do in such a short period of time if it's focused and it works together in a bipartisan way. Everybody's behind it, and it's just unbelievable what we did.
What do you think are some of the biggest lessons? People remember the Tom Staffords or the Neil Armstrongs or the Buzz Aldrins and Mike Collinses or Gene Cernans and John Youngs, but they tend to forget that this was 400,000 people in a national effort. What do you think were the key? And a lot of these folks were 27 years old as they were trying to make this happen, I think was the average age. What were the keys to success for such a program that was so complicated that each piece of it was reinventing the possible?
Well, that's true, but also you have to remember the leaders, the real leaders of it were experienced. And Jim Webb was probably the greatest NASA administrator. He'd been director of OMB, really the Bureau of Budgets, then under Truman, been Assistant Secretary of State. He had worked for a big oil field supply company as president under Senator Bob Kerr, then came here, but he could pick up the phone and call the president anytime. He was a magnificent administrator. The deputy administrator was Bob Siemens, the Dean of Aeronautics and Astronautics at MIT. And then the program manager was General Sam Phillips. He never gets enough credit. But Sam Phillips was the B-52 program manager. The B-52 is still here. And he managed the Minuteman. He's the one that put the 1,000 Minuteman in the ground, which is our major deterrence, that and the B-52s. And then we got him over to Apollo, which is fortunate. But Sam Phillips, to me, was one of the real keys.
And do you think that it was higher risk tolerance? What was it that allowed us to move fast, not just on the Apollo program, right? But so many other things. If you today said, I want to put 1,000 ICBMs in, it might take us 20 years. You guys managed to do that in, I think, less than 5 years, as I recall.
Well, Kennedy said about 3 weeks after Al Shepard flew, he flew on May the 5th, 61, and May the 25th, President Kennedy said in this famous speech for both both members, houses of the Congress, that in this decade we'll go to the moon and return. And it was 14 months. We'll go. That's the goal. But then the big question is, how do we go? It took us 14 months to decide. And finally, there was fighting between Houston and Huntsville about different ways to go, but this chief engineer, his name is John Hubbold from Langley, Virginia, the Langley Research Center, and his team came up and said, no, the way to do it is a lunar orbit rendezvous. And he would convince Siemens, and Siemens knocked people's heads together and said, oh. So it was July of 62, said this is how we will go to the moon. And then I came on board with the second group of astronauts who would do those missions 2 months later. But really, July of 62, and 5 years and 4 months. Remember this, 5 years, 4 months. We built the world's biggest building by volume, the world's 2 biggest launch pads, and the world's biggest booster, and launched it successfully. 5 years and 4 months.
And what do you think, though, aside from leadership, what made that possible? Was it organization? Was it clarity of thinking? Was it the fact that everybody was an expert engineer? Was it the fact that nobody was breathing down your neck? Because you were also one of the most distinguished acquisition executives in the Air Force's history as well. What were some of the keys, do you think, that made all of that possible in such a short period of time, when now, you know, the Air Force's counterinsurgency attack program has taken longer than that to get to the point where we're just going to build a couple of prototypes and fly them?
Yeah, the thing was, you focus. We knew what the goal was, and then there was just a few critical people that really went to it. Just like later on as Deputy Chief of Staff of the Air Force, when I headed research, development, and acquisition, I started all those stealth programs with no statement needed requirement, but I knew what was needed to keep the Air Force ahead of the rest of the world. And I did the F-117A in 2 years and 8 months, and it was operational in less than 4.
So it's possible.
It's possible, but right now you have too many regulations, and you have too many people at the top, too many layers of bureaucracy, and also I think people want to be too politically correct, and I know we used to have hellacious arguments with some of our good friends about technical issues.
But it worked out all right.
It worked out right. In other words, you don't take it personally. It's talking of an issue.
Let me take you back to the mission itself. You know, Apollo 10 has been always regarded as among the most selfless missions. You guys came within 50,000 feet of the lunar surface, and a lot of folks said, boy, that's a long way to go and not land. But you guys still set an enormous number of accomplishments. Why is Apollo 10, in the scheme of all of these missions, so historic? Because it did pave the way for Apollo 10, but folks don't exactly understand exactly how you guys did that.
Well, we developed all the procedures to fly a lunar module and a command module, the first lunar module to the moon, and put all these procedures, everything down to 50,000 feet, or really 47,000. And we also checked out the lunar landing radar that has to work to update the computer you can't land. And we also picked out with high resolution, the best we could, these potential landing sites, 3 landing sites on the Sea of Tranquility. And then all the procedures back, and the rendezvous, the reentry. And so we were given the books to my buddy Neil. We spent quite a bit of time with the 11 crew, but they concentrated on the powered descent from 50,000 feet down to the lunar surface, on the surface for a few hours, 50,000 feet up. We'd done all the rest, but ours unfortunately was too heavy to land. And they didn't have the descent software, powered software worked out for that last 50,000.
Yeah, I mean, and explain that to us, because I think a lot of folks just think that NASA was somehow being capricious and saying, well, you know, Apollo 11 should get the glory. But it was actually some very solid technical reasons why you guys couldn't land as well.
Well, the lunar module was too heavy. We gave Grumman $10,000 a pound for every pound he could carve out of the descent stage, and which is a lot of money per pound in those days. So the software to control that engine for the descent was still not completely worked out either. But the main reason I was too heavy.
You're a legendary test pilot, and you did 2 Gemini missions, 2 Apollo missions, and you flew the lunar module. What was it like flying the lunar module, and how agile was it? I mean, if you're going to, like a car guy, you were going to assess how each one of these vehicles rides and drives, how would you compare them?
Well, the lunar module was, it was somewhat like the command module, but once you got rid of the descent stage, the ascent stage was pretty sporty because it didn't weigh too much. And with that, with fuel and everything, it weighed about 11,000 pounds. And you had these 4 quads around with 4 100-pound thrusters, so you could get a pretty good rate. It was a lot like Gemini, really.
And Gemini was a fun ship to fly, wasn't it?
Oh, yes. It was more like a F-104 or T-38, yeah.
Let me ask you about why you guys picked the names that you did, right? Everybody understood that on Apollo 9, and for folks who didn't know, the Apollo 10 is the mission, but you guys, once you got to 2 spacecraft, you had to name each one of them once they separated, which is why on Apollo 9, it was named Gumdrop and Spider. That was pretty understandable because one looked like a gumdrop, the other looked like a spider. Why'd you guys pick Charlie Brown and Snoopy?
Well, the mission assurance and safety and reliability program and NASA got the permission from Charles Schulz, who drew the cartoon Peanuts, to use it. And Snoopy was very, very popular. To get a silver Snoopy for individuals or organizations that did very outstanding work. There's a lot of publicity, so it wants to award outstanding things. So it helped morale, helped motivate other people. So I wanted to honor those people. So like I said, we'll name one Snoopy. So that was Snoopy, then Charlie Brown just had to follow.
And it's amazing because I've had the honor of meeting some of the folks who've had silver Snoopies, and they're extraordinarily proud of that award. Frank Borman has said, the commander of Apollo 8, another legendary astronaut, has said that he looked at the moon program not just as an American technological achievement, but that it was legitimately a Cold War battle. Did you and the other astronauts see it the same way as Colonel Borman?
Yes. It was kind of the projection of soft power. And there's no doubt the Soviets are trying to get there too. And they were also trying to do just first a loop around, a free return trajectory. Say the Soviets have been to the moon. And that's why we sent 8 up there when we did. That was a gutsy mission. George Low made a decision. He made that decision before he flew 7. And 7 went good. 8 because the Soviets every 2 months would try. And their booster, it was a Soyuz without the orbital ball in the front on top of a proton.
That's right, because that was the N1 that failed 4 times. Oh, no, this is the...
Zond.
Oh, the Zond. That's right, the Zond.
Yeah, and they wanted, and for first stages failed, second stages failed, guidance failed. They finally got one that went around. But we didn't know, but the parachutes didn't work, and it dug a big hole in the ground near the launch site.
And of course, the N1 booster failed, right? I mean, we were moving 4 times. And for the audience, right, 10 million pounds of thrust with 30 engines. Is this why you prefer 5 fewer, more powerful engines than many smaller ones?
Oh, absolutely. Because, you had 30 engines on the base of the F-1, and that meant 60 big pipes coming down, liquid oxygen and kerosene, 2 pipes for each engine. And where we only had 10 pipes for 5 engines.
Right. The difference between the Saturn V and the N1. Let me ask you about the losses that you incurred. Every year there is a remembrance by many who are devoted about the loss of the Apollo 1 crew, of course, with Gus Grissom, Roger Chaffee, and Ed White. But there is sometimes not as much of a recognition, for example, of Elliot See and Charlie Bassett. They passed away, which sort of paved the way for you to take command of Gemini 9. Talk to us about the people who were lost and how special they were to all of you and to the program.
Well, we're rather, kind of a band of brothers. We're all in there, my group of 9, and the other people they joined. We had one mission, and that was to get to the moon in that decade. And so we all felt real close, even though we competed. We felt real close to each other. And it's real sad when we lose somebody.
Let me ask you 2 more questions because I know you've been most generous with your time. What's your most cherished memory of the space program? Because you had so many of them, whether they were in Gemini or Apollo, before as well as after.
Well, I did the first rendezvous in space and prove out the theory we could go out. That was one of the keys to how we got to the moon was rendezvous, lunar orbit rendezvous, but we'd never done a rendezvous. And I did the first rendezvous in space. Wally Schirra was with me. And then I did 3 different types on Gemini 9. And then, of course, the first rendezvous around the moon. And then later on, the first rendezvous with the Soviets. And so I've done more rendezvous than anybody in the world, besides holding the world speed record.
That's right, because Apollo 10 still holds, and you were also the farthest humans from the moon.
No, Jim Lovell and his crew on Apollo 13, they couldn't burn into lunar orbit. They let the lunar swing by, so they went a little higher.
Ah, okay. But you still got the speed record, which is important.
Speed record. Well, It's 24,791 miles an hour, or Mach 36.
That's extraordinary. I mean, I still get giddy about it on the orbital velocities. The President Trump and the administration has announced a very ambitious plan to get back to the moon in 2024. I know that you still consult and advise with NASA. Do you think that this program is going to succeed? Because there is a concern that that it was kind of a quick decision and there is not enough groundwork and folks are concerned about the funding. Do you think that it's going to succeed to take people back to the moon and keep them there as a forward base to then try to get to Mars?
Well, it could be successful, very successful, if we use the right type of architecture and do things right. If we do things dumb, we won't succeed. But you won't use that as a base. You'll do the testing there. And that's was results. One thing, a big study I did as chairman for President Bush Sr. when he started. And what's happened to us, though, in this country? See, President Bush, on the 20th anniversary of the first lunar landing, said that we will return to the moon after the turn of the century. And in the second decade, perhaps an expedition to Mars. So we started down that way, and NASA did a study that wasn't too good. So I was asked by the vice president and the president if I would put together a group called the synthesis group and determine how to go there in a way that's faster, better, safer, and lower cost. So I put together 45 people full-time, 150 people part-time, ideas from academia, from aerospace companies, other industrial companies, and RAND Corporation synthesized the ideas from all over the U.S. and gave them to us. So it was a real workout, mentally put it. So finally, the vice president, I had a joint press conference in June of 1991 about America at the threshold. And JPL did all our trajectories and ways. So it's still the Bible, how you go. And there's different ways you can do it. But the main thing, you need a big booster. If you don't have that, you're not going to go. You can, a series of small ones. No.
Are you satisfied that we're on the right course? I mean, obviously, Space Launch System, the SLS, is in development right now. Some challenges there, of course, in any time you're developing such a big rocket. But are you convinced we've got the architecture and the thinking right to make sure that we get there by 2024 as planned?
Well, you need a big booster. You'd like to have even more lift than the SLS, but you could do it with that. But less than that, it's going to be about impossible. Now, how you approach it, I haven't seen the final architecture.
Let me ask you two quick questions, one a serious one, one a lighthearted one. First, does you're a distinguished airman. You spent a career in the United States Air Force, and you've devoted your life to space and the nation's security. Does the United States need an independent space force, or is that something that should stay within the United States Air Force?
Well, it depends what all you put in the Space Force. If you take Space Command, the Navy Space, Army Space, and the NRO and put them all together, you might have enough. I haven't studied it in depth. So.
And let me ask you the lighthearted question. So one of the best beat Army, Go Navy stunts involved your Gemini 6 with Wally Schirra as commander and you aboard the spacecraft. You approached Gemini 7, which had Jim Lovell and commanded, of course, by Frank Borman. There were 3 Naval Academy guys up there and 1 West Point guy. And in your video was in your window was a proud Beat Army sign. Right. Talk to us about how that came about. And it was just before or after the Army-Navy game?
Right. Well, we got delayed. We were supposed to rendezvous with the Agena in October as a target vehicle, but the Agena blew up after the Atlas boosted it most of the way in orbit. It lit off and bang, it blew up. So somebody came with the idea, hey, 7's going to be a long duration mission. So except for we'll get launch 7, then the Air Force can turn it around, get 6 on the pad, launch it, and do the rendezvous, and which we did. We started out, and unfortunately, engine shut down at T-0, and a fire broke out below. We got hit with, and we had the liftoff signal. It was a real touch-and-go situation, but we found we had 2 double failures that morning, human error, and but we didn't eject. We're supposed to. In the mission rules, we should have ejected. We didn't. And then we found the problems, turned around a couple of days and launched. And then on December the 15th, 65, we did it. But while we were waiting at this time, Al Shepard, he was head of the astronaut office, Naval Academy, Wally Naval Academy, I was Naval. He said, hey, we ought to do something. You'll be up there and Lovell can snap a picture and be, give the midshipmen some morale. So I said, hey, what about the Go Navy and all this? Finally, it was Wally or Al said, what about Beat Army? And so, okay, he said, Stafford, you go get us a picture. So I went down to the local drugstore, got some blue paper and some yellow, and then I went to the simulator that has the same dimension as spacecraft, cut out, made a format, cut it out, and had our secretary cut out the letters. So when I said, if it goes good, I'll add it in my data pack, I'll pull it out and ask Lovell to take a picture of it.
And how did the mids do in 65?
Think they won?
Sir, thanks very much. It's always an honor and a pleasure talking to you, and hope to see you again in this commemoration. Are you doing some commemorations at the end of the day? Are you talking more about your experiences? Are all the astronauts doing a little bit more?
There's lots of requests. I don't honor that many. We just had one in my hometown. We had a prime or backup of every Apollo mission there. Because unfortunately the ranks are thinning of the Apollo crew members, so either prime or backup.
Sir, for many people, you guys will remain immortal. Thank you very, very much. It's always an honor, and I hope you have a great Memorial Day weekend.
Sure will. Thank you. It's great to see you.